Well, hi there, everybody, and welcome to the third season. Who would have thought there would be three seasons of OxyMorons? And appreciate you being with us here today while we kick some of the dirt off the gears of not having done this for 2 or 3 months. And really pleased to have Mike Salvarezza with us today. Mike's the content director for the MER conference. And before hopping into all the details associated with the topic I want to talk with you about today, in the MER context, if I'm not mistaken, the call for presenters has just gone out again.
That's correct, John. And before I answer anything, thanks for having me today, and I appreciate this. This ought to be fun. Yes, today we issued the call for speakers, call for presentations to the 2023 MER conference. So if there's anybody out there that has an interest in submitting a topic, we have a whole page on our website that details how to do that and what kind of topics we're looking for. But we're excited. We're excited to be getting started, and it'll be in Chicago in May of 2023, and really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it would really be exciting. We had a glimpse of that in Indianapolis last year about getting back in touch with people again in person, and being in Chicago will be truly, really exciting. So I'm looking forward to it as well. So what the show's about, for folks that haven't been here before, is OxyMorons, kind of a weird name. And what I like to explore on these conversations is what I call the secret sauce of practical dreamers and visionary pragmatists. And the idea being that you run into people all the time who are really great at strategy but suck at tactics, and then simultaneously people that are excellent tacticians, but it's hard to figure out what it adds up to. So that combination is what I call an oxymoron, and they're a rare combination. And Mike is truly an oxymoron. I mean that in the most complimentary sense of the word. And when you're not making the world safe for information governance, which granted is a permanent and lifelong task for all of us, what do you like to do for fun? What do you do?
Well, that's a good question, and thanks for asking. Yeah, my other side of my brain, my passion in life, actually is underwater. I'm a lifelong scuba diver and underwater photographer. Been doing that for the better part of my life, and have traveled pretty much the world, from the Arctic to the Antarctic and everywhere in between. I write very frequently for magazines and periodicals. I speak very frequently on underwater topics. So the idea of bringing the underwater world above the water to show people what's down there, to show people why that part of our planet is in danger, why that part of our planet is so fascinating, that really is a passion of mine.
Wow, very cool. So have you ever done any off the eastern coast of the United States, specifically like Outer Banks of North Carolina, Cape Hatteras, off that way?
I have, actually. I was on an expedition just last year off Cape Hatteras. There's a whole load of shipwrecks off of North Carolina, as you might imagine. And those shipwrecks come about because of bad weather, hurricanes, that kind of stuff, but also lots of stuff from World War II. People don't realize how close to the American shore the conflict in World War II came. German submarines were patrolling the entire eastern seaboard.
Yeah, we go to Cape Hatteras all the time.
We're sent to the.
Whoops, I'm sorry, you cut out for a second there. Yeah, Torpedo Junction out there, and we go to Cape Hatteras all the time. And there's actually, it's interesting to me, right near the lighthouse at Cape Hatteras, there is a little plot of soil for three, and it's actually a piece of Great Britain, for 3 British sailors that washed ashore after being torpedoed off the coast and washed up there. So very interesting, very cool. Also, the Monitor, USS Monitor, was out there for a long time and brought up, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so ago. So
yeah.
Tell me about your background in governance and records. I was when I first started talking to you, I was really stunned with how deep your background was. So tell a little bit about that.
My professional background actually started in the world of IT. I was an IT person for a good part of the front end of my career. And while I was working on information technology, I was the chief technology officer for Altria Group. I became involved in the world of compliance. And funny story, the chief compliance officer offered me a job in the compliance function, and I was kind of intrigued and interested. I was looking for a way to maybe have a different kind of impact beyond IT. He offered me this job, and he said, the only catch is you can come and work for compliance, but the only catch is that you'll have to take records management. And I assure you, Mike, I assure you that it will be 5% of your day, 5% of your time. Well, records management for Altria Group, which was a tobacco company during the big tobacco wars and the huge government settlements, records management was extraordinarily important and extraordinarily complex, and an awful lot of pressure and an awful lot of focus, and a big bright light was shining on it. So that was my indoctrination, sort of trial by fire. No pun intended. I was deposed. I was, all of that stuff. After Altria Group split apart as a corporate conglomerate, I left Altria, went to work for a boutique compliance consulting firm called LRN, but I really continued as their information governance expert. That was the work I did for them. And since then, I've been sort of on a consulting track, and I've also become part owner of the MER conference. So all of that, that's a very high level summary, but I've been involved in this for a quarter of a century. I have managed global information governance programs, records management programs, e-discovery programs for a Fortune 5 company. So I do have a fairly extensive background in this area.
So in a Fortune 5 company, and a high pressure cooker, I would imagine, given the issues involved.
It really was, because there was a tremendous amount of focus from the government, who was suing the company for billions and billions of dollars to turn up records, to make sure that the company wasn't destroying records for nefarious reasons, which we weren't. So that was, as I said, in indoctrination, it was really a trial by fire.
Yeah, for sure. So what's different now compared to when you first got into this thing?
So I described my initial foray as, as you said, a pressure cooker situation, and it was, a little bit unique to that company. The world of information governance at that time was not as complex as it is today. That's really the big difference. And that complexity is driven by technology. It's driven by the sort of always on, always connected, many, many different ways for people to work and interact and exchange information. That's different than back in the day. Back in the day, we had to worry about email. We had to worry about repositories of documents that were on file shares. We had to worry about database systems and that kind of stuff. Today, an information governance manager, director, vice president, professional has to worry about Teams and chats and social media. They have to worry about ransomware and privacy. They have to worry about e-discovery. There's just an enormous complexity to the computing world that all businesses are involved in today. And that complexity makes information governance an extremely challenging profession.
Yeah, really. Now, when you think about selling that, that need, selling that, the need to address that challenge, what's the biggest challenge that people face in that kind of uphill sale? And what suggestions do you have for folks to overcome that?
I think the suggestion is to call John Mancini. I think it's, I think the biggest challenge that information governance professionals are facing as they try to sell their program and their worth to the senior levels of their organization is that the pace of business is so rapid today. The rate of innovation is incredibly fast. The need for businesses to compete rapidly, quickly, make decisions on the fly almost, makes it very hard to have a conversation with a senior executive where you're looking at putting in infrastructure that can govern information across the spectrum of technologies that the company is using and not be seen as an impediment, not be seen as somebody or a function that is looking to slow the business down. The business, and it's not because the business is just trying to be fast for the sake of being fast. This is survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
Businesses, especially now coming out of the pandemic, the world of business has changed. I don't think COVID created the new world; it just accelerated it. But be that as it may, it's here. We have a whole new way of working. We have information flying all over the place. We have new technologies popping up every single day. We have ever-present threats, and yet the businesses, it's hard to get them to slow down and say, okay, let's put a stop on this new development, this new project we're building, this new product that we're building, because we can't figure out how to govern that data. That doesn't fly anymore. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think there's a hard dichotomy that organizations experience right now because on the one hand, the imperative coming out of COVID is to essentially digitize everything that moves, digitize everything so that you can, really move towards this vision of becoming a digital business. And so I've seen organizations spending, gazillions of dollars on investments in those kinds of processes, and yet, be real stingy when it comes to digitizing the underlying information that fuels those processes. And so there's this disconnect, I think, that is also a source of opportunity for people in the profession, because you can't digitize a process until you digitize the information that fuels the process.
I think that's right. And I think it's always been the case that as you make the argument for these types of programs, that the crutch that you can sort of easily fall back on as well, you don't want to get sued, so you want to stay ahead of the lawyers. That kind of was a big driver in the past. Today it's you want to make sure your data doesn't get breached. You want to make sure that you're not held up for ransomware. And it's the fear and sort of that creating that fear. I don't think that's the right approach. I really don't. I think that what information governance needs to get better at is and having a real clear argument for why it's an accelerant to the business, why it is important for the business to govern and manage its data, not from the perspective of staying ahead of the law, but from the perspective of deriving real value from the information and real business advantage from the information. And I don't think information governance has gotten that argument down quite yet. But that's where I think if information governance could make that argument clearly and demonstrably, then I think it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea that it's not just hygiene. Basically, governance can be the accelerant. I like that word to the business. And I also agree with you. I don't think that we've effectively, collectively made that case yet. to the business so that they understand that. You and I have talked a lot about this concept of truth and what information is real and what people are real. And I mean, we certainly have seen this play out in the social media environment, and we've seen it play out in the political environment in terms of what's real and what's not real. But talk about this a little bit in the context of organizations and this challenge of trying to figure out what's real and what the role is of governance in helping make that more clear for organizations.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic. It's one that I'm very passionate about, actually, because I think I'll get off my soapbox in 10 seconds, but I think that the erosion of being able to accurately discern what's true and what's not true, the erosion of that is contributing to a very significant breakdown in our society. And I really feel that. And that sounds very apocalyptic and very hyperbolic, but
we tend to agree on that.
but I think it's really playing out. Records management, information governance, historically focused on data authenticity, information authenticity, making sure that a record, once it's captured, stays that way, that it's not changed over time, that when it's produced in a courtroom 10 years later, that it's the same exact document, it's the same. That's data immutability. And there's a chain of custody and all that stuff. That's not what we're talking about at all here, because the record today can start out as a piece of false information, and it can stay that way forever, and we can assure that it never changes, but it was false from the beginning. It's the ability for anybody to get onto any platform and amplify misinformation or disinformation to hundreds, thousands, perhaps more people with a click of a button, with the veneer of respectability, with the veneer of legitimacy. There are tools out there that help you create videos that look exactly like they look real. It's very difficult to discern that they've been doctored or that they've been manufactured. Similarly, statements that are made, the attacks on science, the attacks on facts. So that's a soapbox. So what can we do about that? I think information governance should be focused on this, both feet, all in. I think that combating the dissemination of disinformation and misinformation should be a very, very, very high priority. And it shouldn't just be the tech giants, the social media giants of the world, although I think they have a huge role to play. But I think all businesses have a stake in this, because I think we all have a stake in this. So I don't profess to have the answers. So I do sort of put that caveat in here that if I knew what the answer was, then I'd be talking to you from a different office. But I do think that we all have to come together as professionals, as information governance specialists, and figure out how businesses, how people, how technology suppliers can all work together to combat what should be seen as a common evil. Forget about what side of the fence you're on. The common evil here is the use of false facts and misinformation to steer the direction of a particular debate. It's always existed. People have always lied. People have always created arguments in their own self-interest. But today, the technology allows the amplification of that to degrees that have never been possible, and it's really having very detrimental effects to our society. So I think businesses should be stepping up and figuring out how to use information governance to combat this.
So for those who have joined late, I'm John Mancini for OxyMorons with Mike Salvarezza from the MER conference, and we're talking about all things governance and truth and identity. And you raised a couple things that occurred to me, sidebars of this whole question of immutability and authenticity and all that stuff, that just personal experiences that I've had recently. One is, I worked on this book called Immigrant Secrets, which relied on, in large measure, on accessing health records for my grandparents. And what really struck me along the way is how disconnected those policies are with the reality of privacy protection in the real world. So we spend an inordinate amount of effort as a society trying to keep people out of diving into old boxes, while at the same time, the whole nature of privacy is changing as data is aggregated. And so there's this disconnect that I think governance folks can help play a role in, trying to, address. The other one, which strikes me recently, my mom's 91, and I do a lot of her, help her with a lot of stuff. And I'm always amazed at financial organizations. I have power of attorney, financial power of attorney and yet there'll still be things that pop up that say, well, could you put Mrs. Mancini on the line, which is problematic because she's not here, but that's another question. But the part that's funny to me is that, it's not like they have a voice print of her, or voice ID of her or anything. And my usual response is like, if I was a crook, don't you think that I could have an old lady impersonator standing here? Because all they ever ask is it okay if we talk to John? And then, she says yes, and then we proceed. And I just think the whole, it's like a dance that's disconnected with the reality of identity and privacy and security and all those issues that are so important in the information management arena.
Yeah, I think there's vestiges of old ways that are still around, right? You go to a point of sale, you go to a store, you want to buy something, they ask you swipe your card or tap it on the reader. Okay, now sign your name.
Yeah.
How often does that signature really resemble your signature? Because the technology is terrible.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody could write anything on that, and if you disputed that charge, they would say, well, you signed. And I could just easily say, that's not my signature. That's just scribble. There's a lot of vestiges of old ways. And I think the complexity of the technology world is such that it's hard to get your hands around all of it, right? So to your point, the financial institution that needs a verbal confirmation from an elderly lady, that's just a vestige of an old practice. I think the bigger problems, John, are sort of a love-hate relationship with things like privacy, right? We have extreme concerns about privacy, and the companies that are truly implementing GDPR, for example, or truly adhering to PCI compliance, or high trust certification, pursuing high trust certification in the healthcare business, are spending millions and millions of dollars. But the whole world lives in a place where you're giving up your privacy every day. You sign on to a system and you click accept. You're accepting that they're going to use your data, or or you're accepting the cookies that they're putting on your machine. And if you can decline it, but that just means you don't have access to your application. You're basically opting out of society if you do that. And I think that love-hate relationship with privacy is an interesting one. That we lean one way, we want everything protected, but in reality, we're operating the other way. So I think you're right to point out there's a lot of interesting things out there.
It's just so funny when you think about it. Like if 10 years ago the government came and said, listen, what we're going to do is require everybody to carry a device that will let everyone know where you are exactly at any particular point in time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we would be like, no, no way, and of course we all do that. That's what it is, and,
exactly. Right.
And so it's just a funny disconnect and I guess it happens. It'd be interesting to think about other points of technology disruption in the past, and the lag time associated with, the desire to use the technology and the comfort with the implications of the technology. And I guess we're at that point in Technicolor, right now.
I think we are, and you see, yeah, I think we're at that point. I think you see that disconnect at a lot of, you see it in the government, right, where or the courts or the laws that don't really keep up with the way the world really is working. So there's a lot of ground to cover there in terms of how do we bring the regulations, the laws, up to speed and matching what the world is actually doing. You can't roll back the world. The world is going to do what it does. So how do we make everything more in harmony with what we're actually doing? That's a big challenge.
Real hard question. All right, last question. And you have vast experience with IG professionals. In order for them to be effective in the future, and I think we've touched on some of these issues so far, but what would be recommendations that you would have for them about how they need to change their game, in order to become more relevant in this changing world that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that there's two or three things that are paramount to that. One, information governance professional really has to be extremely IT literate. I think there's just no way around it. You can't help the organization govern its information unless you truly understand Microsoft Teams, for example, if that's what your company is using, and most companies are. So to understand Microsoft Teams is to really understand the technology platform that the whole company is operating on. You got to be IT literate. At the same time, it goes back to the question I answered earlier. I don't think you can be successful unless you can talk business and really understand how information governance can benefit the business, and not from a stay out of jail perspective, but from a how do we make more money perspective? How do we get more market share perspective? How do we convert more clients perspective? How do we create more business innovation? If the information governance professional can't speak in those terms and speak with authority, it's an uphill battle. And I think finally, information governance professionals cannot be shrinking violets. They have to be conveners. They have to work with multiple disciplines. They have to work across the organization. So that means they have to have some degree of leadership, because they need to win the debates. They need to present complex topics in non-complex ways, and they need to do it across the organization.
Well, Mike, thanks so much. It's really been a pleasure talking to you. And again, just a reminder to everybody, I believe the call for presentations is open at MER now.
Yes, it is.
And so, and MER is in Chicago next year. And so everybody should be excited about all of that. And I look forward to chatting with you on the ramp up to the conference next year. And thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. I really appreciated you inviting me to do this, and I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks.